Thank you. Well, when they asked me earlier my summary, I didn't phrase it very well, but I guess the best way to bring it up is talk about a caller that you had last week. I think it was Ruth Ann.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and there was a lot of talk about, started off talking about babies. Does your God see children starving to death? And Eric said, he made the point, does your God see them starving? Yes. Does he have the power to fix it? Yes. And his point was, then he's either impotent. Well, sorry.
Impotent or uncaring.
Impotent or uncaring. And I could be that he was mad is the third option. He's angry.
Yeah, so to be clear...
Impotent or apathetic. And I'm saying maybe he's just angry.
Sure, but one, it's an interesting place to argue because there isn't sufficient reason to believe that there's a he there. But the proposition, oh no, there is a God that cares, and there is a God that could stop children from...
Not really that he cares.
No, that is the proposition that's being responded to. If the proposition was, does a God exist, was the proposition, and someone said, well, bad things happen, therefore no gods could possibly exist, that would be a bad argument because you could have malevolent, evil God things, which again, I don't think there's sufficient reason to exist, but it sounds like that's kind of the point you were getting to.
What is your explanation for it?
Yeah. Max? Oh, hang on. Looks like you were put back on hold.
Why would he be?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry,
we missed
Max.
that.
I think somehow you ended up back on hold. Well, what I'm sorry. Did I somewhat get at the point you were making, which is just saying that bad things happen doesn't mean that there necessarily isn't a God that lets them happen? Because I agree with that. Bad things happen, and so the proposition, oh no, there's a God that wouldn't let bad things happen, has direct evidence against it, which is bad things happen. But if you want to talk about a God with an unknown nature, that's kind of a different conversation.
Right, well, it's unknown. If you're following the Bible, just from the perspective of someone who's Christian who believes the Bible, I think it's not unknown. The Bible is clear that he is very malevolent and angry and jealous and wrathful.
I mean, I can agree that that is a reasonable conclusion to come to if you believe that the God character described in the Bible exists.
I was going to say, it's in my view, this is almost sort of spinning our wheels a little bit.
Yeah.
The more important question is
does a God exist?
Is the God real? Yeah, does the God exist? And then all the other stuff is he good? Is he bad? How does he make these moral pronouncements when it comes to kids? This is all secondary in my view. I don't know even where you stand, whether you believe that there's a God or not. But I think the more important issue here is the God real? What is your view on that question?
Is the God real? Right, yes.
Mm-hmm. The God is real?
Yes.
Okay. So whether he's a good God or a vicious God, it's almost not important, right? Like the bigger issue is how you're concluding that he's real. Do you want to spend a little time?
I think it is important.
I would just clarify and say it is important if the first part of that, which is a God is real, can be demonstrated. So arguing about a hypothetical God is different than arguing about a God that's been reasonably demonstrated to exist. Right. And the first part, let's not put the cart before the horse.
Can I try it this way with a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What I'm wondering, Max, is would you be less sure that the God exists if it was an evil God? Or if there was some demonstration that the description of the God was evil? If there was no ambiguity at all, and this is an evil God, would you be less certain that he existed? or more, or the
I
same?
don't think there is any ambiguity. Yeah, he is an evil God. As an example, if you're following the Bible, the God from the Bible, hold on, let's see.
With all respect, that didn't answer my...
It's visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children and to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So that's evil. Like, if you're punishing, your great-great-great-grandchildren for the sin of the father or their great-great-grandfather, that's evil. Like, that's not very ambiguous at all.
All right. My question, though, is whether this is an evil God, whether it's being described as an evil God or a good God, does it have any bearing on whether the God exists or not, whether it's been described as good or bad, good or evil?
I think if someone was arguing that there was a good, benevolent God, then yes, that's kind of torn apart by the evils of the world. So that's not as believable. Only a malevolent God is believable.
I mean, it's interesting because what you're talking about is, well, taking a look at reality, the world around us, and coming to the conclusion that it doesn't comport with a benevolent God is interesting. So what I'm wondering is, what is the...
But I'm not the only one who's done that. You all have
yeah. I mean...
by saying, either God is apathetic or impotent.
Yeah.
We've all made that same conclusion.
Or malevolent. I mean, part of the thing is, generally when people call in, they want to talk about how the God they believe is good and is doing good things. But really, there's three parts of that.
It's a more of a might is right argument.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter if he's good, if he's going to burn you for all eternity for not following him.
From my perspective, it doesn't really bother me whether this is a good or bad God. What's important is how you're determining that this God is real. That's really my area of interest. I can entertain the discussion, I suppose, like what would be better to have, a good God or a bad God or an apathetic God, but...
how do I determine that the God is real? Well...
That would be a more interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Right. What's the basis for that?
Okay. Well, I don't have conclusive evidence. There's a few things. I was raised as a fundamental Bible-believing Christian. It's basically their belief. They're not so public about it because it doesn't really draw a crowd in. But God is angry with everyone and wrathful. But if the God is true, so.
Hold on a second.
Things that make me believe in it. Just
that's the more
evidence
important.
of the Bible. I know that's not great evidence. I don't have great evidence, but it's like.
Well, my question is, what evidence do you have at all?
Yeah, what would you say is the best piece of evidence that brings you to a high degree of certainty that your God is real?
The best piece of evidence, it's not evidence, it's just information about the God, is the Bible. I'm not saying I have good evidence. I don't think there is good evidence. It's just like a Pascal's wager, do you want to be wrong?
Right, if the God was real, I certainly wouldn't want to be mistaken on it. I'd like to believe in the God. So, because this particular God, the way it's described, the penalty for not believing in it, or if it's real and you don't believe in it, is pretty brutal. So if it's real, I would certainly want to understand it. So what is it about the Bible that makes you think it's the best evidence that you have to support the claim that there's really a God?
It's just the one that I'm most familiar with. I'm aware that another religion's God could be correct, and I'm doing the wrong things. I'm just saying it wouldn't matter how unreasonable it is if you're wrong. You got to pick one.
Wouldn't it?
That's your best.
I mean, to be clear, wouldn't it then be most reasonable for a person to pick the most malevolent, terrible God idea to believe in? Additionally, how do you determine which God ideas are in that category? So I can think of a God idea right now. Would you then add that to your betting pool as far as which God idea you would bet on?
I would guess...
For the God that you just make one up?
Then I have a God idea that I talk about right now.
if you propose like some parameters for the God, he does this, he does this. Yeah, yes. Not if you were saying like specifically, he lives in my ear and he's 2 foot tall. Not your specific claims, but if you just describe other attributes for the God could have been like this, then yes.
Okay, so it seems like you're giving ideas about God the kind of pass that I don't think you would give other ideas about other claims.
Because
about
other
God.
ideas don't have such a high risk.
Well, the problem is that they do. So people believing, for example, that there is one master race and that the Jewish people must be eradicated is something that you can believe based on that. And then you can believe that the quote unquote, and you can go down that path and it is demonstrable what will happen.
It's not, that is horrible. Genocide.
It is entirely horrible, but that is an idea that...
One death is never as high a risk as an eternity.
Okay, so...
No matter how painful and horrible your life was and how senseless your death is,
so
that's never as risky as eternity.
It's true. It occurs to me that there is a hard limit on the kinds of things that you are, quote unquote, betting on about reality, which is whatever you happen to hear about or think of.
Well, it sounds like whatever is the most familiar to you.
Yeah.
Was the kind of that's
Right,
that's the one that got my attention. So what I'm wondering is, can I just finish this question?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no problem. What I'm wondering though is if there was a completely different God that you were more familiar with, would you be calling a show and professing that you were confident that that God existed?
It's not that I'm more. I know I said familiar. It's not that. That's the one the examples I'm using, but I try and find. It's not like this is what I've raised in. This is what it is. I try and study stuff all the time. This is a reason why I watch your show. I want as many inputs as possible. So yes, yes.
Yes, what?
If I was more familiar with another religion, if I was raised in Islam, I would probably call you and say probably the same things. The God of Islam is also cruel and malevolent.
But again, we're kind of focusing.
The religion isn't really important. It's just the God.
Yeah, what I'd really like to keep focused on is not whether this is a good God or a bad God, but whether the God exists. And it sounds like what you're saying is that because you're more familiar with the Christian God, that is kind of the reason why you have a high degree of confidence that this is true. And if you were more confident, I'm sorry, not more confident.
A high degree of confidence that what is true.
That the God is real.
Right.
Right.
The Christian
Because I'm
God,
more familiar with.
Right, and if you were more familiar with Allah, the Muslim God, that you might be calling a show and explaining that you're confident that that God is real.
I'm not confident that God is just that a creator that has the power, something that has the power over an afterlife, over anyone's existence after this life.
If you were unfamiliar with any gods whatsoever, would you be an atheist?
If I never heard of the concept of any gods whatsoever.
Yeah, would you have a high degree of confidence that there were no gods?
I wouldn't think about if there was a God or not, but yeah.
Okay. So is your familiarity with Christianity, that seems like that's the big thing that's driving all this. If you were unfamiliar with it, you wouldn't be confident that the God was real.
No, if I was totally unfamiliar with it, if all I had heard is someone came up to me and said, I've never been, or any knowledge of religion, and said, by the way, did you know everything is created? There's a God, he wants you to act a specific way. He wants, that's enough.
Okay.
And that would be enough to start, that probably wouldn't be enough to start thinking, but and then another person came up to me and said it, like, it doesn't have to be specifically the God of the Bible. Just if the concept is introduced to me.
So I want to ask one more question and then I'll turn over to Jamie here. And let me try to phrase this. And if you don't understand it, let me know. But my question is, how does familiarity with a claim have any impact on the claim being true? Whether I claim that,
It wouldn't. Even if I was totally ignorant and there was a God, that wouldn't matter. If I totally was 100% confident that there was no God, if there was, my familiarity with it has no bearing on it.
I agree. I didn't know whether you wanted to.
No, I kind of wanted just to pause and let that sink in a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like if I was raised to not believe in any God, I was unfamiliar with any God claims. It doesn't mean that there are no gods. And conversely, if I was raised in a Christian family and I was very familiar with the texts and I can recite verses and all this stuff, my familiarity really has no bearing on the truth of the claim that the God is real. So if familiarity is one of the biggest and best pieces of evidence that you have, yet it can lead people to believe things that are not true, why do you have a high degree of confidence that the Christian God is real?
I don't have a high degree of confidence. I have enough of a degree of confidence to be worried about it.
Well, so I would repeat that basically the same form of the question is, if the epistemology or if the reasoning that you use to come to a conclusion is something that can come to a completely contradictory conclusion to the one that you hold. It can be used to come to the conclusion that there are 9 gods or 12 gods or no gods, or that numbers aren't a real thing. Why would you use that method of reasoning to come to a sufficient confidence to be worried about something?
Why would I use the information I have to come to conclusions?
No. So the method that you're using is familiarity with an idea affects...
That's how much knowledge I have about it.
Yeah, yes, but...
Can I take a stab at...
That's how I determine everything, is the information that I have about it.
I want to take a stab at...
So yes, familiarity with an idea is how I...
Well, what I would say is not all information is equivalent. So I actually have a kind of pet thing that I do in my spare time, which is familiarize myself with...
Pokemon.
Well, no, actually, I'm mostly ignorant, but with conspiracy theories, many of which are entirely contradictory. Should the more of a person's off-the-wall manifesto about how marshmallow people control the world affect just by hearing the idea and hearing it more, should I then say, well, the more times I hear it and the more I listen to this person, therefore, regardless of what they're saying, I should give that idea more weight? No,
you still have to use your brain.
Okay.
To decide what is reasonable or what is right. It's not just, if I learn more about this, it's probably more true. The more I study on something, the more it's true.
Right. So the reason that I said that is it very much sounds to me, and I think I may be mishearing you then, or maybe I'm just stating it in different words, that what you're saying is, well, I'm more familiar with the Christian God, and because I'm more familiar with it, I'm sufficiently confident to be worried about it, on the one hand, initially in this call, but that just now, what you've said is something equivalent to, well, it doesn't matter how familiar you are with an idea, that doesn't mean that you should give it more weight regardless of the idea. So,
well, because I think the Christian God is more believable than Marshmallow Man ruling the universe. That's the part about,
I don't know how to quantify that, but what it sounds like you've just said is, okay, well, it's not, what I'm hearing you say is it's not your familiarity necessarily with the Christian God, but the actual idea itself, which seems to be a different position than what we were initially talking about. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm sorry.
Can I attempt to? I want to try to repeat back what I think you're saying. Okay, and if this isn't it, Max, please correct us. But I think what you're saying is that yes, I understand that being familiar with a claim does not mean that the claim is true. I think you were on board with that. And, and then I think the second part of that you were saying is that, however, the penalty for not believing the claim is so high that it makes sense to believe it anyways.
Yes, because belief is so small a role. To be saved by the Christian God, you don't have to live a specific lifestyle or do anything or have any, just believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. Say, yeah, I think it's reasonable, and that's it, you're done.
Well,
that's like a tiny payment into a huge risk.
Well, let me ask you, do you want to believe this belief? Do you want to believe this claim because you have good reasons, or because you're afraid not to believe it, or that it just makes sense to believe it even though it might not be true, it might just be the safer option, or something else? I don't want to pigeonhole you to those.
To be afraid not to believe it.
Could you be afraid to believe something that's not true?
Could I be afraid to believe? Would I be afraid of having a untrue belief, you mean?
No,
can I just refer?
I was going to say,
go ahead.
I think what you're saying is it possible to believe something that is not true because you are afraid?
Yes.
Okay. And what I'm hearing you say is you believe in the Christian God because you are afraid.
Yes.
Do you have any reason of being afraid if the Christian God isn't real?
If there's another angry God out there, yes.
I was going to say, well, snakes, but
right. Like if you were more familiar with Odin or something like that, if you were more familiar with a completely different God, I think maybe we covered this earlier.
The God doesn't matter. Any God, just all-powerful being.
Well, actually, I'm not sure, because a moment ago it sounded like you were saying that part of the reason for your belief was the fear of the consequences. And now it sounds like you're saying any God, but there can be God ideas that don't have a punishment for belief.
Right. Well, then, yes, any God that has a way that he wants you to act.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. Maybe just shift gears just a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you're being so blunt and upfront with us. I think it's great. I want to commend you for that. It really is refreshing. Thank you. Yeah, it really is refreshing to talk to a theist who's willing to kind of honestly explore this with two atheists here, two heathens.
Yeah. You're good listeners.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, thanks.
I kind of lost where I was going to go with my second part. I guess. Keep talking. It'll come back to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, right now you believe in a God idea because you're afraid of the consequences. Because if there is an infinite afterlife that is under the control of a malevolent God, it's I'm going to give this person all of the money in my wallet because they have a gun to my head. So even if I have $1,000 in my wallet, that is worth less than my being alive. Is a metaphor for you saying, well, if I believe that this malevolent God exists and I'm wrong, that penalty is less than the penalty of inciting this malevolent God to punish me for eternity. If somebody has a gun to my head, I'm out $1,000. If I just believe there's a God, I'm not out anything. I disagree with that point, but that's not really where I want to go yet. There is an idea of God that is a God that values reason and skepticism and despises credulity as sin. And that God, with its greater than infinite reason and logic, whose understanding of the concept of understanding is more than our minds could ever understand, can inflict a punishment that is more than infinite if we are credulous. This idea of God creates a greater idea of risk than the God of the Bible. If the basis for the ideas we consider is, forgive me for using a word as blunt as flimsy, is as flimsy as whatever idea a human can come up with and tell other people about. You can come up with 10 gods an hour for a day and just have an unbelievable amount of math to try and calculate, well, I will determine what is true based on betting. I don't think that that's a really good way necessarily of trying to figure out what is real, right? So for example, if I'm trying to determine whether or not it's safe for me to cross a street, I might look at the crosswalk, and I will certainly look both ways before I cross the street. But what I won't do to determine whether or not a car is coming is think about whether or not I'm late. That might prompt me to take a risk, but it won't prompt me to believe that there is no car. If that makes sense.
I have a quick question to ask you, Max, if that's okay. Or did you want to respond to Jamie there?
No, go ahead. I wasn't sure.
Well, yeah, so if I can state my conclusion more clearly, if I say, well, I won't cross this street because it is better for me to never cross this street in my entire life for 80 years than to risk my life ending at age 25 because I've chosen to cross the street now, regardless of how far down each way of the street I can see or whether or not I can determine that the street is blocked off by a police barricade. Would you agree that that would be an unreasonable approach to take to whether or not to cross a street?
Yes.
Right.
It's not that it's reasonable. I'm not saying this is a great reason to believe it. It's just, it's not, you did not get to cross the street. You're not losing anything.
You are.
So there's no.
So what?
There's no harm. There's no harm in this belief. It's not good to have false beliefs, but there's no harm in it.
It's worse to have a bad way of determining what to believe, because throughout the rest of your life, you will encounter ideas and conclusions and either believe them or not believe them. And if the method that you use to determine what is true is wildly unreliable, then you will end up believing things that are not true and end up not believing things that are true. And the less a person understands about reality, the more likely they are for a reality that they don't understand to harm them, and realities that they don't understand to harm other people because of their actions. What I'm trying to get at, and I'm doing so kind of obtusely, is...
There's two different sets of reasonings, of epistemologies for the world around me, ideas I encounter, and then supernatural, otherworldly ideas that there can be no evidence for because if they're supernatural.
So why would you come to a conclusion at all?
Generally speaking, or about...
No. I mean, if you cannot evaluate evidence for a claim, why would you confidently come to a conclusion about that claim at all?
I know this isn't a great answer, but because of the complexity of the claim, it's not something that you made up on the fly while we're talking. It's a whole history of a religion.
Well, yes, but what you've said is if there's a claim and it's supernatural and you cannot evaluate the evidence for it, you treat that claim about things that exist in reality differently than you would treat a claim about something that exists in reality that you could examine. So right now I can claim to know things that are happening in, Pyongyang with no evidence. And as far as I'm aware, you do not have a way of evaluating my claim that there are unicorns there right now.
I have a few ways of investigating. I have information.
I feel like the State Department of the United States may want to employ you, but...
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Real quick?
I'm getting into the weeds.
Yeah, and this has been going on for a little while. Maybe my last question to you, what I'm curious is Max, if you no longer feared the outcome of not believing, let's say you got over it. There are some atheists who they eventually get over it. Sometimes we struggle with it even after the fact, but if you were to overcome your fear of not believing in this God, would you still believe in it?
No.
All right.
Okay.
And then actually,
I appreciate your honesty on that.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this is a fantastic call, and I'm glad you called in. And I'm about to ask if you'll call in again next week.
That would be really great if you could call back.
Yeah.
Right. I know it's not a good reason to fear. It's have you ever heard of PBI, Pensacola Bible Institute, Dr. Peter Ruckman?
I'm afraid not.
No.
We have some hands.
Okay,
Yeah.
He's died a few years ago. He was known for being really just hateful, really, just very vile, a King James only, but just a really vile. Anyway, he was also known for he was a really good artist. He was a chalk artist, and every Sunday during his sermon, he would draw like a billboard-sized chalk drawing, and there was a lot of hellfire sermons and a lot of drawings of people just burning in hell and descriptions, and it was like a game for the kids. Whoever could ask him first if they could have the drawing got the drawing, and we had a few of them, and I know that's not a good reason. Like you said, if I could get past that fear, I would let it go. I think he's a horrible, vile God.
You know what I'm wondering is,
much.
you know what I'm wondering, Max, if there was somebody in your similar situation watching this, and they're struggling with this fear of eternal torment, and it's the one last thing holding them into this belief, what advice do you think that you would give them for the first step that they can take in greatly reducing their fear? Have you ever thought about that? What would you tell them?
Well, what I have done to somewhat alleviate my fear is investigate atheist claims. Watch your shows.
That's good advice.
Thank you for watching.
Well, I didn't mean it just for like the promotional part of it, but
Like, comment, and subscribe.
I mean, I think for myself personally, watching the Atheist Experience and then newer shows like yours has been really great in coming to grips with my atheism and my lack of belief. And even though I used to be a believer as a little kid, I was always kind of skeptical. But every once in a while, I'm like, that whole fear, that whole hell thing, I really hope that that's not real. Have I really thought this through? And then I remind myself that I don't have a good reason to be afraid of it. And shows like this one and the others, I think probably would be a really good thing to keep surrounding yourself with other points of view. And I think that might be really helpful. Another thing that you might want to consider, there is a wonderful organization called Recovering from Religion. And you can go to recoveringfromreligion.org, I believe it is. And one of the biggest topics that their agents get, they have trained agents that can talk to you on the phone or through text. One of the biggest things they get is from theists and atheists who are still afraid of hell. And they have wonderful resources for you. So I guess maybe just to kind of wrap this up, keep being honest with yourself, keep questioning, and seek out other places of support, shows like this and maybe even something like Recovering from Religion. And I really do hope that you call back. I think that it would be fantastic if you can call back and we can, track your progress. Maybe you can find a good reason to believe that this God is real, other than, well, I'm afraid to not believe in this God.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling.
And Max, please do call in or at least email and connect with us on social media, because this has been a fantastic and refreshing conversation. And like Anthony said, that is kind of, that was one of the initial driving factors of having this show, is being able to talk to someone not just the 1 week, but a second week and a third week, to see what effect the conversations have, and to be able to have those longer, not one-off conversations. So please, if you can, find the time next Sunday, or literally any time during the week, to email. This would be fascinating.
And not to put too much, pressure
on you.
Not to put too much pressure on you. However, I do think that this dialogue could be very useful for people who are struggling with the exact same thing that you're struggling with. So I really appreciate that you called and you were willing to honestly examine this topic with us, and it was refreshing. It was really great, and I wish you all the best.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you for calling in,
I'll
Max.
probably talk to you later.
I hope so.
Bye, Max.
Can we debrief after that a little bit?
Yeah.
What did you think?
I thought that was a fantastic call.
Yeah.
I hope that it's the first of a few calls like that, because I feel like Max seems interested in thinking about these things. I hope if Max decides not to call or communicate with the show again, that they do reach out to recoveringfromreligion.org, which is an excellent resource.
Yeah, I think,
et cetera, et cetera.
if you remember, the way that it started, we were going to spend all this time talking about, is the God good or bad?
Yeah.
That's really, yes, it might be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah.
However, what's more important is the God real? Why do you think that it's true? What's your best piece of evidence?
Yeah.
It was familiar to her. It was the most familiar. And she kept bringing up the penalties that come with not believing.
That would come with not believing if the God exists.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. And if perhaps you were, if you, this may have been the question I was thinking about before, but if you were more familiar with a completely different God where there was no penalty for not believing, would you be more apt to believe in that God? Would you be calling a show stressed out if your God had no penalty for not believing? It might be an interesting question that she could ask herself. But no, she was very, very honest, and she said, if fear wasn't involved in this decision, I wouldn't believe in this God.
Yeah.
That kind of tells you all that you need to know.
It also very much highlights why we do the show and why we do what we do, is that there are people who are in this situation, situations like it, and situations that are worse, because from a young age, they were taught to be afraid, and in a, hateful doom God that issues doom for eternity from a doom palace on its doom, as fans of Invader Zim will appreciate me saying, hopefully.